Donald Trump's decision, which had previously only been discussed behind closed doors. US President Donald Trump announced the deployment of 5,000 American troops to Poland, right on the border with Russian territory, specifically the Kaliningrad region. Although just weeks earlier, the Pentagon had actually suspended the deployment of a new military group of 4,000 troops to the country. And today, the American president reprimanded the US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, for allegedly delaying the deployment of American soldiers to Poland. Of course, this caused confusion in Poland, NATO countries, and the US Congress at the time, because earlier all insider information pointed to the redeployment of American troops from Germany specifically to Poland. Well, those who are subscribed to my YouTube channel and who carefully watch all my episodes have actually known this for a long time. They knew the logic behind why the US was redeploying troops within Europe, and they knew that sooner or later those troops would end up either in Poland or in some other Eastern European country. And by the way, today the logic behind the redeployment was officially announced by US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, leave any comment, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram. The Pechi News channel, the link to it is in the description of this video. So, US President Donald Trump has officially announced the deployment of an additional military contingent to Poland, consisting of 5,000 American servicemen. The country shares a border with the Russian exclave, that is, the Kaliningrad region. Trump stated the day before, quote, based on the successful election of the current president of Poland, Karol Nawrocki, whom I proudly supported, and on our relationship with him, I am pleased to announce that the United States will send an additional 5,000 troops to Poland. But obviously it's unlikely that friendship with Nawrocki is the real reason for the deployment of American troops. The fact is that the day before, a high-level delegation headed by Deputy Defense Minister Paweł Zalewski was in the United States, and they met with the Deputy Head of the Pentagon for Policy, Elbridge Colby. It's clear that the Poles lobbied for this decision as much as they could, but other factors also played a role, particularly pressure from Congress. Because even the Republicans do not intend to leave the issue of protecting Polish interests aside, since this concerns all of Europe. But Poland is actually at the center of all discussions. Poland has bipartisan support in Congress, and politicians have criticized the Pentagon for the decision to suspend the deployment of those 4,000 soldiers. Peter Hegs criticized this today, and so did Donald Trump. And despite the statement by NATO's Supreme Commander in Europe, General Alexis Grinkovich, that the suspension of the deployment is not a reduction, politicians in Congress still wanted to play it safe so that the Pentagon and the White House wouldn't change their minds again. It has gotten to the point where some in Congress, mostly Republicans, want to limit the authority of Donald Trump's administration to withdraw troops from Europe unilaterally. To do this, it is proposed to finally use the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA Act. This is the very law that includes a ban on reducing the number of American troops in Europe below 76,000 soldiers. But there's a much more interesting question here. The US no longer wants to play the same role in Europe as before. They want to leave. They want to make a big flashy exit. It's already obvious that there will be significant changes, and the next NATO summit will clearly show that. To that end, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is holding meetings with Europeans today to discuss the future of the alliance. And now the US is demanding that Europe take responsibility for its own security, and Poland is signaling that they want to lead this process. Today, before departing for the meeting of NATO foreign ministers in Helsinki, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that US President Donald Trump is extremely disappointed with those alliance members who did not allow the United States to use bases on their territory to wage war against Iran, specifically singling out Spain. But the leaders of NATO countries once again emphasized that the US has not actually asked its allies to take part in the war against Iran, except for these loud statements by Donald Trump on social media. Nevertheless, many still allowed American forces to use their airspace and military bases. I've long said that Trump is being very dishonest when he claims that Europe didn't help him. Oh, they helped a lot. But it is Warsaw that is considered one of Donald Trump's key partners in Europe and did not take part in his disputes with other NATO countries on security and Middle East policy issues. Poland is also among the largest buyers of American weapons. And importantly, it spends one of the highest shares of its GDP on defense among NATO countries. In addition, Poland is purchasing F-35 fighter jets and even Patriot air defense systems from the US. It's important to remember that Trump also previously announced plans to withdraw those same 5,000 troops from Germany due to disagreements with Chancellor Friedrich Merz. In that case, the number of American troops in Europe would return to levels seen before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. These troops could actually be redeployed specifically to Poland, just as we discussed in previous episodes. The US is simply shifting its troops from Western Europe to the east. For example, they are removing them from Spain and Germany and threatening to pull them from Italy. But all of this is simply being redeployed to Eastern Europe, because Trump can't reduce the overall number of troops in Europe. And Warsaw itself has long said that it's ready to accept more American soldiers, and that strengthening the US presence will reinforce NATO's eastern flank. At the moment, there are already more than 10,000 American soldiers stationed in Poland on a rotational basis. And today, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that the redeployment of American troops in Europe is not being used as a means of pressuring NATO allies. Here is the quote. "This is not a punishment, but an ongoing process that has been continuing. It was ongoing even before the current events." Rubio added that Washington has global commitments that require constantly reviewing where American troops are stationed. Rubio also noted that there are broad opportunities for cooperation with NATO in the defense industrial base. In general, well, you shouldn't always react immediately to Trump's statements. Usually something entirely different is behind them. At the same time, another important point arises. Against the backdrop of new threats from Vladimir Putin and the nuclear exercises being held in Russia and Belarus, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated directly that the United States has suspended trilateral talks with Ukraine and the Russian Federation on ending the war. The US Secretary of State said Washington currently sees no reason to continue these meetings. Quote, "We are not interested in getting involved in an endless cycle of negotiations that will lead nowhere." At the same time, he emphasized that the US is ready to return to dialogue if there is an opportunity for constructive and productive negotiations. Rubio also called the rumors that Washington is allegedly pushing Ukraine toward a certain position in the negotiations fake. And against this backdrop, Trump is still sending additional troops specifically to NATO's eastern flank, which borders the unwashed, wild Russians. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.